Consider this, folks. You remember the movie E.T.? You remember the moment on the screen when some candy was handed by the boy to the extraterrestrial? What was that candy? How do you know that? There was about 5 seconds or less on that screen where that took place. The sale of Reese's Pieces went through the roof. What you saw influenced behavior. Now, if that occurs from 5 seconds on the screen, what effect does the Texas Chainsaw Massacre have on young people who happen to be vulnerable to that?
Happy Halloween, everybody. Consider this a bit of a treat episode here. This is a bonus outside the normal episodes I usually do. So if you're new to the show, I am a former fundamentalist who sheds light on the dark side of the church, from the pulpits to the pews. Typically, this is cases of abuse, generally sexual abuse within fundamentalist conservative Christian circles, and sometimes stems into financial mismanagement and abuse and other, high control religious tactics that are incredibly harmful. And then sometimes there's episodes like this one that are just totally unexpected. I think it was like a week and a half ago that this even came into my mind as an idea. So this is a kind of last minute episode that I was like, this would be an interesting one to kind of point out as an odd curiosity. But the way that this all happened, and I wrote it down so I can remember the timeline of events. It's very weird the way this played out. So I'm a huge horror fan. I love, and to be very clear, not a big true crime fan. I'm a big fictional horror fan. So I love me a good slasher movie. I love, I just love the horror genre and all its different flavors. If you're watching this right now, let me know if you too are a horror fan and drop the name of your favorite horror movie in the comments. But I am a massive horror fan. And when I saw the trailer for Ryan Murphy's series Monster, the Ed Gein story, I was really intrigued. It looked really good, at least from the trailer. And then I started watching the series, and I ended up bailing on it a few episodes in, and I pushed further than I really wanted to, but I was hoping maybe it would go somewhere that was good. But I tapped out because it was thoroughly inaccurate, and beyond just being inaccurate, I thought it was inaccurate in a way that was disrespectful to the subject material. It was just completely inappropriate handling of the true story, and beyond just the way it handles Ed Gein's story, the way it tied into things like the lives of filmmaker Tobe Hooper, and particularly the way it handled the life of Anthony Perkins, I thought was beyond the pale, just so disrespectful to the real people, and made me feel disgusted in a way that I haven't really felt since the movie Blonde came out recently about Marilyn Monroe, and where it's just the worst possible example of taking a true story and just exploiting it in a really horrific way. All right, it's like 8:30. I'm editing this right now, and I need to be clear because I didn't say it when I was set up with the professional angle. I'm just inserting this here. It doesn't bother me that films like Blonde or the series like the Ed Gein story are going to show some things that are, not particularly positive, and they're going to show characters going through things that they really experienced. That's fine. What bothers me is when filmmakers craft something that's completely fabricated, that assigns motivations to people that didn't exist. For the example of Anthony Perkins in the Ed Gein series and some of the storyline there, or in the case of Blonde, where they attribute thoughts or actions or experiences to Marilyn Monroe that are just completely untrue. Like, they are just provably false. And that bothers me a lot. And these are two of the most egregious examples I've seen in pop culture history, especially in the last, decade or so. Like Blonde, there's some things in it that are really incredible. Some of the effects are really incredible. The cinematography is really neat. A lot of the performances are really good. Just like Blonde, I think Ana de Armas did a great job playing Marilyn Monroe. It was beautifully shot. It recreated some incredible details. but the script itself and some of the things that they really focused on, I felt was extremely, extremely bad taste. And so I bounced out of Monster. I was really bothered by that show. And after that, I went ahead and stumbled into the John Wayne Gacy series, Devil in Disguise, on Peacock. And I mean, by contrast, what Monster was versus what Devil in Disguise was, I mean, they're night and day different. I think Devil in Disguise is one of the greatest series that I've watched in a really long time. And I told somebody that the guy that plays John Wayne Gacy, let me look up his name really quick. Michael Chernus, I hope I'm saying that correctly, that plays John Wayne Gacy. I told somebody recently it's probably in one of my top 5 performances in a biographical piece. It is absolutely incredible. And I mean, I've watched a lot about John Wayne Gacy. I'm not a big true crime person, but that's one story that I was really fascinated by and have watched a lot about. And I have never seen someone portray a character where I'm, people talk about like getting lost in the role or like, oh, it's like they actually went back and filmed it. I mean, he is incredible as John Wayne Gacy. And beyond that, I felt like the show was incredibly respectful in the way it dealt with the true story, highly accurate from everything that I've read about it. Obviously there's some things you change around for television, but just absolutely phenomenal. And so as I was watching that series, one of the things that was interesting to me is like, I was going, wow, he nailed John Wayne Gacy in the way that John Wayne Gacy talked and acted. And then there was a lot of clamor online about Charlie Hunnam's portrayal of Ed Gein and like, why did he do his voice like that? And there's really very few recordings of Ed Gein that the public can listen to. So we're measuring it against something that's, it's hard to get a full grasp on how Ed Gein sounded. But, apparently Charlie Hunnam was able to go back and listen to recordings that aren't publicly available and based his voice on that. So I don't know one way or another. I thought Charlie Hunnam's voice was fine in Monster and it worked for what the series was. Again, it wasn't a low light for me as opposed to some of the things with the script. But yeah, I started seeing that and went, okay, how many serial killers or like people, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Ed Gein, down the list of people, what serial killers do we have the most audio recordings of? Like who have the most interviews recorded where there's like a lot of them both like showing how they talk and communicate, but also just like discussing their crimes. And I think that's a really interesting rabbit trail I found myself on late at night. And so I started going down the line. And one of the first names that popped up in the list of people who had the most recordings of them was Ted Bundy. And so I started going down that rabbit hole. And by pure chance, I clicked on the final interview with Ted Bundy or something like that, some title like that. And it cut to the interviewer and my jaw dropped because I recognized the interviewer as James Dobson. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with who James Dobson is, I mean, I've covered him a little bit on the show. If you listen to my conversation with Marissa Franks-Burt and Kelsey McGinnis, which I actually happen to have their book right here. They wrote a book called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. I had them on the show a couple months ago, and we talked a lot about Dobson. And he was a psychologist and, evangelical leader. He's the founder of Focus on the Family, and he was a pretty controversial figure. He advocated for the breaking of the will of children through corporal punishment, supported conversion therapy, and preached a lot of really sexist ideology. And just, there's plenty you could dive into, but yeah, Dobson is a figure that I've not covered in a positive light when he's come up on the show. And I just thought, if I didn't know this little tidbit about Ted Bundy, that Dobson was the one who did the last ever interview with him just hours before he was put to death in the electric chair, maybe a lot of people in my audience don't as well. And so I thought I would just do a little bonus episode and talk about it. Again, this is not a step-by-step analysis of that actual interview. There are experts, I'm sure, that could do in-depth body movement analysis and pick apart every word. For me, this is truly just a curiosity. So the way this kept snowballing was I watched the entire interview with Dobson and Bundy. I watched like an 40-minute or 30-minute presentation Dobson gave about it. I watched some interviews on some news programs. And then I ended up watching a couple of films about Bundy. So I just went on this big tear, just going through a bunch of content about it, and stumbled across, I watched the Zac Efron take on Bundy. I watched the one from the director of Freeway. I think it's just called Ted Bundy. And then I watched the film No Man of God, directed by Amber Seeley, incredibly directed by Amber Seeley, I should say, and starring Elijah Wood and Luke Kirby, which I thought was absolutely incredible. And that film in particular stands out. And I do recommend, if you have not seen it, it's streaming on Tubi for free. So you can go over to Tubi and watch it. I also rented it for myself on Vudu for $1.99 or something. Go watch that movie. It is absolutely incredible. And one of the things that stands out, in addition to Luke Kirby giving one of the best performances of Ted Bundy you'll ever see on film, and Elijah Wood giving an all-timer as well, is there's extended scenes featuring James Dobson and the whole circus happening around that time when Dobson did that interview. And it seems like all of that is very accurate based on some conversations I've had and the research that I've done.
You are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
Which leads me to the next part of this big old snowball that just kept happening. I started looking up Ted Bundy experts because I was like, I want to talk about this on the show. I hate talking about topics where I am not an expert, which is almost all of them that I cover on the show. And so I reached out, or I started Googling who are the most respected Ted Bundy experts. And the name that kept coming up over and over again was Kevin M. Sullivan. And Kevin is a really fascinating person. Or actually, I've got a list. I've got my show notes from when I interviewed him. Kevin is an American true crime author, journalist, and speaker, best known for his extensive work on the life and crimes of Ted Bundy. Born in 1961, Sullivan has written several prominent books about Bundy, including The Bundy Murders, The Trail of Ted Bundy, and Ted Bundy's Murderous Mysteries. His research is considered by many to be among the most thorough, and he has been consulted as an expert about Bundy's psychology, biography, and case history on numerous media platforms, including Reel's Ted Bundy, Serial Monster, and the TV miniseries Ted Bundy, The Survivors. His background encompasses roles as a pastor, private investigator, and crime historian. And he offers insights into the workings of serial killers, often drawn on interviews, police records, and survivor accounts. And his books are cited as foundational text for Bundy researchers and fans of true crime literature. He's also known for participating in various documentaries and podcasts, contributing through commentary on both the criminal mind and the cultural impacts of infamous cases. So Kevin's name came up. I reached out to him the next day, got a response. He was open to doing a conversation with me, and we scheduled it, and we recorded on, I want to say Tuesday of this week. It's Thursday, October 30th, as I'm recording this intro right now, and you're listening to this on the 31st. So it's been a whirlwind. Kevin was so gracious. I sat down with him for about an hour and 45 minutes, probably closer to 2 hours altogether, and just asked him every burning question that I had left over. Oh, I forgot to mention also, part of the snowball, I downloaded Kevin's first book as an audiobook and listened to the entire thing. So I just threw myself into this in a really wild way and asked a bunch of burning questions. I will release the full hour and 45-minute conversation with Kevin on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/preacherboys to hear the entire thing. But if you're like, I don't want to spend money on Patreon, I don't blame you. I'm going to release the full hour and 45-minute interview publicly on feeds in a couple weeks. It's just, if you want early access, consider it a fast pass to that content. I feel always kind of weird, completely paywalling stuff like that. So it won't be long term, but if you want early access to that and tons of other content, patreon.com/preacherboys. So anyway, in this particular episode you're listening right now, I'm going to specifically share some snippets from our conversation about Dobson himself. And then obviously there's a bunch more that we talked about that you can hear about later. But for this episode, we're focused on Dobson. Again, this is not a play-by-play of everything said in it. It's just a couple of curious pieces of this puzzle that make for a really fascinating story and part of evangelical history, but also serial killer history and just an interesting wrinkle in this true crime story. So here's a couple of things that are relevant to this story. So the first question, obviously, when you see Dobson sitting down with the first really official serial killer that we label a serial killer, Ted Bundy, your immediate question is, how did these two end up in a room together? And, this is a piece that I've heard a lot of different layers to, and it's the first question that I asked Kevin M. Sullivan about. You don't cover this in your first book in great detail, but I'm curious, how that came about, who floated that conversation happening in the first part. I've heard that Bundy specifically asked for Dobson. I've heard that Dobson, reached out and pushed his way in for the media. I've heard that John Tanner arranged this. Like, who coordinated this conversation?
You know what? It could have been Tanner because he was working with Tanner, who was a minister, and Tanner's wife was there too, and so they worked. Bundy worked with them, but it had one thing. The only thing I was able to discover about that, it was Bundy's final decision that he wanted to do it.
So one of the names I mentioned in the question I asked him was John Tanner. John Tanner was a prosecutor who defended Ted Bundy in his final trial. And Tanner had previously served as Bundy's prayer partner in the prison ministry for a few years. And he was actually part of the Mormon Church. For those of you that don't know, Bundy was baptized into the Mormon Church later on in his life when he was in Utah, involved in some of the killings there. And then once he was in prison, he made his conversion to a more evangelical, generic version of Christianity, or at least his alleged conversion. But yeah, John Tanner was likely one of the people who, kind of got Dobson on Bundy's mind. And then Bundy started corresponding with Dobson, according to Dobson, for quite a while with letters, and then decided to write him specifically to have an interview with him.
Many of the members of the press have said that they felt he was doing a con job to the end. Did you ever have any suspicion that he was conning you, that he was lying to you, that he was using you in some way that wasn't clearly expressed in your previous communication?
I didn't think that then, and I don't believe that now. I have correspondence, direct correspondence between the two of us that goes back to August of last year. He sent me an 11-page letter in August. The theme of that letter was his concern about violent pornography. He had read the reports. He knew the scientific studies. He was very informed on that subject because he felt that it had destroyed his life or contributed to the destruction of his life, but also resulted in the death of many innocent people. And there was a consistent pattern. Every letter that he sent me focused on that issue. So there wasn't anything strange that happened in that last interview a few hours before his death.
So you feel it was, in fact, the last honest statements of a condemned man?
Brian, the best answer to that question will come from watching the video. Listen to the man's voice, look into his eyes, and draw your own conclusions. I think it's obvious.
Now, Kevin is somebody that's been studying Bundy for a very long time. He's written 1,500 plus pages of material on Bundy, spent a lot of time talking about him, researching him, getting to dive into his psychology. And so I had to ask him, okay, we know how this conversation happened, sort of. We know what the reason was kind of supposed to be. But I asked him a little bit about why he thinks Bundy did this.
As a young minister, not a writer, back then, the first thing that I thought of, because I've been reading about true crime since I was 10 years old, was, Bundy's snowing Dobson. He's blowing smoke. This isn't real. And of course, all Bundy's friends who heard some of the things that Bundy said, that's a lie. When he talked about hard pornography changing him and stuff like that.
As a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, or the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with the sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far.
Any kind of pornography. We'll take a young man who views it and he wants to have sex with females. They just, that they go, oh, that's great, isn't it? That's great. But it doesn't lead people to cut off a woman's head.
Yeah.
It doesn't do it. And it just doesn't have the power to that kind of stuff to make Bundy what he was Bundy's internalization of violence from the time he was young. And he himself told Ron Holmes, the late Ron Holmes, criminologist here in Louisville, known all over the United States, he said, I started finding these when I was 14, these detective magazines. I remember the detective magazines. They were all over. There were 5 or 6 of them. They had been started in the 1940s. They continued for many, many, many years after Bundy, and then they're all gone today, obviously. But you'd go in a store. I'd see them with my friends, big-breasted, good-looking women, a drawing of her. But she's got a rope around her neck, or a knife is pointed at her, or a gun. And I would think, wow, the lady looks great, but what's up with this violent stuff with her? Mm-hmm. And so anyway, as I got older, I had occasion to read a couple of these. They had some really interesting articles, but I never subscribed to them or anything like that. But Bundy said those made a real impression on him. And later he told Bill Hagmeyer he would work out some of the fantasies that he's seen in these magazines with the victims. And more than hard pornography, he was really turned on with things like that. In fact, when they found the stolen VW that he had been in during his escape to Florida before he was arrested, did it have a Hustler magazine in it? No, it had a cheerleader magazine of like 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. And the reason why Bundy admitted to 30 murders, but he killed more than 30. We know he did. He himself alluded to it in a taped confession long before the end of life confessions, right at the end before he was executed, which I must say during those, he was trying to be extremely honest.
During the end of life confession?
End of life, like that madhouse week of people coming in and out. And like I say, on top of that, Mike Fisher came back to see him just by himself. And he gave Mike, and it all appeared in my book, brand new information about what he had done to Karen Campbell, what he had thought about it, and things like that. And it's too bad he was able to destroy these because but he had taken Polaroids of his victims prior to their death, acting out some of these scenes that he had seen in like detective magazines, and then after death. And he had those in Utah in the utility room, like downstairs in the utility room on the first floor. He had a second floor apartment. This was the utility room was a section that was on the first floor. It may have a section where you go down to, but anyway. But the bottom line is, when they searched his apartment, they took everything they thought was important, But when he got out on bail, he told Hagemeyer, he said, I took those and I destroyed them. But what would be important to have them is you might find some pictures of women on there that are not known.
No.
You know, even if you could know who they are, Bundy never talked about it. It's like this. He admitted to Bob Keppel for Washington State, I killed 11, but he only gave the names of 8. He admitted to Dennis Couch, by that time, Jerry Thompson, I think, was retired, or not retired, but reassigned to something else. And he told the Utah detective Dennis Couch he had killed 8 in Utah, but he wouldn't give more than the names of 5. So we know he took some things to his grave, and what that might be, and what he admitted to on one of these tapes, not at the end of life, but like when he was talking to Stephen Michaud or somebody else, because there was other people that interviewed him.
Yeah.
He said that this person, he was speaking the third person, was responsible for either half a dozen or a dozen deaths of preteen girls or young girls. And so Bundy didn't like to talk about anybody that he murdered that was really young, although he had to talk to the Idaho detectives about Lynette Culver. That's another one of the things I found out. Several things new that had never been published before. She was out of Idaho, but she was 12. And his last victim, Kim Leach, out of Florida, where he nabbed her in Lake City, Florida, she was 12. So he had to talk about, he didn't talk about Kim Leach because he wasn't going to give the detectives down there any information on that. He knew he was going to trials and stuff like that. But he did, but even at the end of life confessions, he kind of stayed away from that. But he did talk about Culver, who, again, was 12 years old. But he didn't, I believe he probably killed some 10-year-olds. I mean, I studied a lot of murders and missing females in the surrounding states during the time that Bundy was active in those states. And I came across some things that have the MO of Bundy. It might not be. And we'll never know for sure.
Yeah.
But we do know he admitted to killing more than he admitted to by name. So likely those are young girls rather than women, because he didn't seem to have too much of a problem talking about the women he killed that were 18 and over.
Now, one of the things that really is frustrating about this conversation is it's so clear to me that, like Kevin said, Bundy's blowing a lot of smoke here. And it's very clear that he's latched on to exactly what Dobson wants to hear. I think, in my opinion, he kind of obfuscates his own responsibility and redirects all of the blame onto other things, onto alcohol, onto softcore pornography, onto hardcore pornography, and really is just pouring into Dobson's kind of moral majority approach to these topics and giving Dobson exactly what he wants to hear. Dobson is asking very leading questions throughout this interview. And when Dobson does ask some questions that start to actually dig into the actual crimes that Bundy committed, specifically, he asks about Kimberly Leach, who was the 12-year-old victim that was the last one Bundy killed before being arrested for the final time. And in that moment, Bundy says, I don't want to talk about it, kind of looks down like he's getting emotional. And there's a moment in that clip that just is so unsettling to me where he kind of looks up to Dobson, like, is he still going with this? Is he buying this?
One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now.
That's too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that that experience is like, but I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
I can't begin to understand. Well, I can try, but I'm aware that I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have and these young women that I have harmed feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question. I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has, and I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly again this kind of violent pornography, where on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony.
It's just so clear to me that he's like kind of manipulative in the way he's talking to Dobson. And I mean, Kevin said that's kind of like par for the course for him. Now, in the course of our conversation, to go full circle with what I was talking about at the beginning, I asked a couple questions, and there's some more in the extended version of this conversation. Like I talked about, which actor do you think best portrayed Bundy and things like that. But unprompted, Kevin brought up the movie No Man of God, and he talks about, again, kind of the circus of those last few days of Bundy. And, and a couple things that have come up since where people go, if Bundy had lived longer, do you think it would have confessed to more? How much is accurate about like the way a film like No Man of God depicts those final days? How upset were people with Dobson? And, Kevin kind of shared his take on that based on his research.
Some people say, couldn't we have gotten more information out of Bundy? I don't think so. I think those end-of-life confessions and what he told other people in like third-person accounts, I think really you've got just about everything that you were going to get from him. Was he ever going to tell you the names if you knew them? Oh, by the way, you mentioned in programs, I've seen a lot of these Bundy movies. They've got a lot of pluses and lots of minuses. But if you haven't seen the movie No Man of God, you must. Have you seen it?
It's one of the three that I watch, and it is by far the best in terms of the actor portraying Bundy, nailing it. And just as a film that is respectful as respectful as you can be, covering the material in a fictional way. Like, I think it's phenomenal, and I second the recommendation. It's a fantastic film.
And people need to realize when they're hearing that the main actor, what's his name? He played Hagmeyer. He lives in Austin.
Oh, Elijah Wood.
Yeah. Elijah Wood spent a lot of time with Bill Hagmeyer. When I interviewed Bill Hagmeyer, there was nothing I didn't ask him that he didn't answer. But he spent a lot of time with him. Hagmeyer gave him tapes. Hagmeyer gave him other information. And I'm telling you, several things came out during that he got this information from, there was nothing made up. He got this information directly from Bill Hagmeyer. And I'll mention a couple of them here. One was when Bill asked him, how many are there? He said, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many I killed. They all kind of blend together. And then he admitted to having at least several who, like, he ready to do his thing on them, maybe choked them out into unconsciousness and they woke up. and maybe a couple of them got away in the woods. He said, I was getting my tools out of the car while she's, like lying down on the ground, and she woke up. And he said, the ones that got away, I would leave, and I'd be worried. Are they going to say something? Are they going to identify me? Are they, So he got information that, after I heard what came out, I said, wow, I should have spent more time asking Bill information, because he told me a lot of really interesting stuff. But like I say, that is the most accurate movie I've ever seen. In fact, I was told by somebody who knows Stephen Michaud, well, I said, did you ask, Michaud how he felt about that? He said, yeah, I did. He said, I couldn't believe it. He said, I looked like he was sitting there with Ted Bundy, just like what I used to do. So, it was amazing and very, very, very accurate.
Yeah.
So, I have to hand it to Elijah Wood for doing it right.
Yeah, and the actor who played
actually they got one thing wrong. But I think
share.
Wait. I think they just added it, and I think there's something in the opening credits that speaks of just adding something or whatever. But when they say that the murder of Lynette Culver, when he's confessing and he said, I drowned her in the bathtub, that is not in the record. I got that. It's nowhere in the confession. I got that information from Russ Renault, the Idaho investigator. From Mike Fisher. He had been told that by Russ Renault. I called Russ. He said, yeah. And that's true. And so when I contacted Bill Hagmeyer, who sat in on every confession Bundy ever made, he said, I don't recall that at all. He said, Kevin, you do know Bundy had an MO of strangling the women from behind while having sex with them. I said, yes, I know that. That was his normal MO. He said, I have a lot of respect for the detective who told you that, which originally was Mike Fisher, but I don't remember him saying anything. He didn't say anything like that. And the reason why they found out this information, because if you read the transcript of the confession, of the Idaho confession, two things are going on, and they only have an hour, really fast, back and forth. Yeah. The Idaho hitchhiker that he killed on the way to law school on September 2nd. I was the first person to identify that he actually left on the 2nd, that it was Memorial Day. I think his girlfriend thought he left on the 3rd, and most authors say he left in early September, but I was able to narrow it down to the 2nd of September. And then also not just her, but the killing of this 12-year-old Kim Leach. Well, when they talked about the hitchhiker, there was cranial damage, and they had said in the interview that Bundy had said, well, was there cranial damage with Culver's? And he said something like, no, it would be drowning. Well, because he had said he put her in the, like a river 5 miles north of Pocatello, which would be the Snake River, they assumed that's how she drowned. But the Idaho investigator, Russ Renault, being a smart guy, as he walked out and Bundy had said, look, an hour after it was over, an hour is not enough. If you have any additional questions, I'll try to work you in. Being really cooperative and honest. As they walked out of the hospital, he said, Renault said, hey, Randy, his co-investigator, Randy Everett, could you go back in and ask Bundy? He said she drowned, but he never said really the circumstances of how that happened, even though he said he put her in the river. So Randy goes back in, and I talked to Randy. He said this is exactly what happened. I went back in. I said, I'd like to ask Bundy a couple more questions. They put him in a room. 20 minutes later, 15, 20 minutes later, they brought Bundy in. There was no Bill Hagmeyer to be there. There was no attorney of his to be there. And he just asked him, he said, you said she drowned, she drowned, but you never said how that happened. He said, oh, well, I drowned her in the bathtub. And then Everett didn't even ask him what I'm about to say. Of his own volition, he said, oh, and I had sex with her after she was dead. And he didn't like to talk about the necrophilia. He would hint at it with Bob Keppel. But he said, so I drowned her in the bathtub. So I call Hagmeyer one day and I say, Bill, I'm getting ready to write the story of Lynette Culver. I had the case file coming to me, but didn't have it. And I said, Bill, the only thing I know about this kid is that she was 12 and Bundy, got her and killed her and drowned her in the bathtub of the Holiday Inn in Pocatello. And that's where Bill said, well, that's news to me. So and then he said, well, you should go back and find out about this. And I said, if I find anything different. Now, at the time, I'm the novice.
Yeah.
Bill sat in on it. I thought, well, maybe they're wrong about this. I go back and I finally talked to Everett and Russ Renault, and he said, first thing Russ said to me, here's why Bill doesn't know it. Because he wasn't in the meeting. It was a special meeting.
Yeah.
So I had to contact Bill back. I emailed him and said, oh yeah, it's true. And here's why it's true. And here's what Randy Everett said. But if you look at the movie, it opens up by saying it like he did that. No, he did not. That was all backstory stuff that I was able to. These detectives knew it.
Yeah.
But nobody else had written about it. Yeah.
For the screenplay, they just condensed all the information.
They just condensed
it's true information delivered in a way that was different than the.
Yes.
That's similar. The Gacy series has something like that where his lawyer, I'm blanking on the name, but here's a scene where he comes out and he tells the two police that are waiting outside his office when Gacy's originally confessing to the attorney. And this is the first time the information's ever coming out. And he comes to, and then Gacy's drunk and falls asleep on the couch. And he comes down and says, if he tries to leave in the morning before I talk to you, shoot his tires out. And I thought it was a dramatized line in the show. And then I was listening to an interview with the lawyer and he said, oh, that was I think it was his co-counsel or somebody that was present. That's not in the fictional show at all. They just gave his lines to him. And so it's true, but it's a slightly,
it's slightly
streamlined for, streamlined for television. I am curious, having talked to Bill Hagmeyer, every interview was going through him that was involved. And I know that's accurate, right? He was the one profiling him, so he had to sit in on all of these.
Yeah. That's because Bundy asked him to.
Right. And he would only talk if Bill was there, which is an interesting dynamic.
Yes.
In the movie, it makes a big to-do about the Dobson conversation happening without Bill being involved.
What's the schedule tomorrow?
You have a very light day.
I mean Dobson.
You won't be needed for that.
All of the interviews are supposed to go through me.
All the law enforcement interviews were to be scheduled through you, and they were.
What the heck are you trying to pull here?
I am just trying to give my client a chance to tell a side of the story.
You think Dobson will petition the governor for a stay of
Dr.
execution?
Dobson is a very well-connected man.
We said no media.
And he knows the rules. He just wants to talk to him. Ted will tell him what he wants to hear.
He wants a poster board.
And we'll give it to him. Dr. Dobson, this is Special Agent Bill Hagmeyer.
Special Agent. Doctor, it's good to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. You're doing the Lord's work here.
We've done what we can. We still have a lot of investigators left to squeeze in. Well, your 2 hours are counting down. I won't keep you.
Carolyn, I'm going to check on our setup.
Give me something to drink. I need that light.
That was rude.
How long of an interview can he get with all this setup?
The setup doesn't count.
What do you mean it doesn't count?
Well, this is a real production. You don't just point a camera and shoot.
How long?
We have 7 hours blocked.
7 hours?
Was that dramatized? Did you talk to Bill about was he sitting there going, or was that?
No, but I know some of the other investigators were, I think, a little perturbed because of how much time they were given.
7 hours or whatever.
Yeah. It was, And really, I just want to say this. I think Dobson was trying to put what he believed was the nail in the coffin of pornography.
Yeah.
Which said, now, see, if you do this, you're going to end up killing women and cutting their heads off and having sex with them after you're dead. After they're dead. Of course, this is not true, but sometimes people want to validate their own belief about something. And I think that, I'm glad he did the interview. I'm glad it exists.
Yeah.
I'm glad Bundy shows himself that he's lying at that point.
Yeah.
So anything that you can keep and record for history is good. But I think there was an ultimatum on the part of Bundy and on the part of Dobson.
Yeah, and it would have been
Not an
more.
ultimatum. There was this, it was a desire to really see how bad pornography is. Now, listen, when Bundy did this, all his friends, his attorneys, they said, this is all BS.
Yeah.
Bundy knows better than this.
Yeah.
And Dr. Tanay, which I give a couple pages to in my book, maybe 3 or 4 of his interview with Bundy and his assessment of Bundy. He's the one that said, and I didn't know this at the time, I found this out in the research. He's the one that said that pornography just doesn't have the power to do that to somebody. It just lacks the power. It just doesn't do it. So it can, it can change your feelings about things, and you can become addicted to it without question.
Yeah.
But even those that are addicted don't want to go out and harm women.
Right. Or else we'd have a lot of Ted Bundys out in the world.
Yeah, and we just don't.
So yeah, this whole scenario was just a very mutually beneficial conversation, I think. I think if anything, again, it gave Bundy a chance one last time to kind of defer responsibility in a lot of ways, to blame an outside source that had corrupted him versus taking accountability for himself. And I think it was a great opportunity for Dobson to get this really, what would become an infamous interview, and get to really put what Kevin describes as a final nail in the coffin on these moral issues. And yeah, it's definitely mixed feelings about this, though. I mean, there's a level too where Kevin says, like, it's a good thing this happened. The more material we have to look at, the better. But certainly, obviously, it would have been better for investigators to get those 7 or 8 hours with Bundy instead of this really puff piece kind of conversation that was just completely agenda driven versus trying to find out more about victims versus trying to dig deeper into his psyche instead of softballing questions about, cultural issues. But again, yeah, there's a lot to think about here. One of the biggest pieces for me that stands out, and I'm really curious to get people's takes on this, because I know my audience is, a large swath of you are believers, are Christians, a large swath of you are atheists, and then there's a lot of agnostics in there. I certainly find myself in kind of this agnostic camp at this point. But one of the things that really bothered me watching through footage was there's some moments where Dobson talks about this in retrospect, and he's like convinced that Bundy really did accept Jesus and that he's in heaven.
Sure, he'd killed 28 women, but he is still a creation of God, and he needed God like everybody else. And John and Marcia went into that prison for 200 plus hours and led him into, I think, only God knows, I think, a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, that's offensive to some people. The thought of Ted Bundy going to heaven, it doesn't seem right, does it? And yet the Lord said there's no sin that he can't forgive. And I believe Ted found the Lord. 2 years before he died, John Tanner called me on behalf of Ted. And he said, the Lord is talking to Ted, and he feels that he needs to admit his crimes. He needs to give information that will allow the parents and the families of the girls he murdered to know what happened to them. And he needs to confess what caused him, he thinks, to do this. And he knows the press will not allow him to get that message out because they obviously hated him. And perhaps for good reason.
And I saw a YouTube comment. I'll try to screenshot it and put it in here if I can. It really hit me. And someone just said, by Dobson's belief system, his victims who did not accept Jesus are burning in hell while Bundy is enjoying heaven. And we did get into a long conversation with this. Kevin is a minister and has been for, I think, 40 years, he said. And he has no sympathy for Bundy as a person. I mean, he talked at the beginning of our conversation, like he went all out, like, it would have been better for Bundy to get hit by a bus, than to be able to commit all these murders. And, he made no bones about what he feels about Bundy. But we did get into a conversation about, like, was Bundy's conversion legit? was there something to it? And, and his take was largely, he doesn't think so. And, Bundy seemed again to be blowing a lot of smoke. But he also said there was a lot of weird things that Bundy said near the end of his life. And I didn't bring him on to talk about this like deep theological discussion about it. But I just said, like, that's really a rock in my shoe. It's kind of how I described it, is like, I just can't make sense of him getting away with this on a spiritual level, and that some of his victims, like innocent victims, are, suffered worse consequences eternally. It really is difficult for me to swallow that concept. And, I understand there's going to be people who have different perspectives on that. And I'm sure there's people that are going, whatever, have all these theological ideas, but I can't accept that answer. I really struggle with that. And yeah, it's just I don't know, but you can see that longer conversation. Again, I don't want to put it in here because that's not what this episode's about, but I think, like, for me, it's the cavalier way specifically in which Dobson talks about this. Like, Dobson literally says, sure, Ted Bundy murdered 28 girls, like, in such a flippant way. But then he, like, I don't know. It just grossed me out. It just bothered me. And I'm curious what your takes are as listeners. Like, if you're listening on YouTube, definitely leave a comment or email preacherboysdoc@gmail.com. I'd be curious to hear some of the different perspectives on this, but it just made me feel sick to my stomach thinking that this could have been real. Like, I don't know. It's just, like I said, it's a rock in my shoe. It's something, even doing this show, like, when I think of some of the most heinous criminals, the people who have done the most horrific things to innocent children. Yeah, I don't know. Not to end on a dour note, it's just on my mind. I didn't expect to spend as much time talking about it just now as I did, but me and Kevin talked for a little while about this. I think we spent probably 20 minutes kind of just getting his perspective and talking about it. And like I said, I told him, I said, I think we could have a long conversation over lunch sometime about this, but because I wanted to get into some of our Bundy, just facts and things, and I appreciate him answering, but it's definitely a heavy thing to think about. But anyway, yeah, this was a really curious story, a really curious angle to the Bundy story. And I'm really interested if you guys knew this. Like, I don't consume a lot of true crime. I told that to Kevin at the beginning of our conversation. And so I don't know what people's general thoughts are on the story, if they already know it and they're like, Eric, everybody knows this and you're not a true crime junkie like us and you don't know this. But I thought it was just really interesting. And I'm curious, what do you think Dobson's motive was in doing the interview? And what do you think Bundy's motive was in doing this interview? Let me know in the comments of this video or drop a comment over on social, and I'd love to read through them. I want to read all your theories about this case. Thank you so much for listening. Again, my full conversation, including a lengthy conversation about Bundy's alleged conversion, is available on Patreon very soon. Should be in the next couple days after this comes out. And it'll be available for free to the public in just a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for listening. Big shout out to my guest you heard a little bit from, just a sneak peek of our conversation, Kevin M. Sullivan. Go check out his book, The Bundy Murders, A Comprehensive History. It is one of the best books that I've read that deals with like a true crime case. It's absolutely fantastic. It is rich with details and handles the material in a way that is just incredible. It's a great digestible piece of history, and the audiobook is quite good as well. So I listened to the audiobook version. But yeah, definitely check that out. Check out some of Kevin's other work. And thank you again to him for doing this episode. I respect his study in this so much. And it's clear that so many of the people connected to the Bundy case have as well. The people have given him unprecedented access into their lives and their stories. Speaks volumes of him and his character. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to him, and look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of the Preacher Boys podcast, coming at you this Sunday. I'll see you there. You've been listening to the Preacher Boys podcast, hosted by Eric Skwarczynski. The intro music, Bible Belt, was performed by Lou Ridley.
I said, come on, we are gathered here today to praise the Holy Father, feel the glory of his name. Anyone can worship here so long as you act straight, pay your tithes and follow rules, even the ones God didn't